Okay, this lesson is about the election of 1912 and the Progressive Era presidents. This is the page that you're going to take your notes on. Okay, so you can see we have a little bit of information already provided for you. The three presidents we're going to talk about are Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson, and we're going to talk about specifically the election of 1912. All right, so here are our Progressive Era presidents. Again, we have Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, who came after him, and then Woodrow Wilson. Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, he is the Progressive Party candidate for the Bull Moose Party. He is a former Republican president. He believed in a strong presidency. He used his powers to safeguard the public interest. He used antitrust laws to curb the unfair practices of business. His Square Deal program passed laws protecting consumers, and these included the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Food and Drug Act. He increased the power of the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC, and he added millions of acres to the National Forest and Parks. And this was even before we had a national park system. So make sure you are adding anything on the slide here that you don't already have provided for you. Specifically, I think it's going to be the underlined items. All right, William Howard Taft. Okay, he was actually Theodore Roosevelt's vice president, and now he is running for his second term. But Teddy Roosevelt was not happy with him. So Taft is the Republican candidate. He supported a federal income tax. He supported the direct election of senators. He continued most of Roosevelt's policies, such as trust busting, which is breaking up monopolies. However, he alienated progressives. Remember, this is the Progressive Era. We are trying to make changes and we're trying to make reforms, and some people felt like he was not progressive enough. He angered Roosevelt by returning federal lands and putting them up for sale. So some of the land that Theodore Roosevelt worked to set aside and to protect and to conserve, Taft put it back up for sale and allowed private people and private businesses to buy it. And the conservationists were not happy about it. All right, so in 1912, the 1912 election, Taft received the Republican nomination while Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate, okay, as the Progressive or Bull Moose Party. This caused a split in the Republican Party. Anytime you have a well-liked third-party candidate, it's going to pull votes away from the main candidate, okay? A little bit more information about Taft. He was later appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1921. He is the only person to have been elected president and then later become Chief Justice. So he actually held the highest office in both the executive branch and the judicial branch. So that's a pretty big deal for him. Next, we have Woodrow Wilson. Okay, he is our Democratic candidate. He wanted to have child labor laws. He wanted an 8-hour workday for railroad workers. He wanted to have government loans to farmers. However, he was a segregationist. This means that he believed that African Americans should be separated in public places, in jobs, so basically he did not believe in civil rights for African Americans. He did, however, support women's suffrage and their right to vote. He did further progressive reform with his New Freedom program. He lowered tariff duties or taxes and helped introduce the 16th Amendment, which is income tax. He helped create the Federal Reserve System to control the nation's money supply, and we'll talk about that more. And he also passed the Clayton Antitrust Act, which led to the creation of the Federal Trade Commission.
Wilson and the Democrats win in 1912. As governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson championed many reform measures. As the Democratic nominee for president, he supported banking reform, lower tariffs, and more antitrust legislation. As the presidential campaign progressed, Wilson distanced himself from the rhetoric of the race, allowing Roosevelt and Taft to sling mud at one another. Taft criticized Roosevelt for his large ego, while Roosevelt dubbed Taft a fathead. Of the name-calling, insults, and banter between the two former friends, Wilson commented, "Don't intervene when your enemy is destroying himself." The election of 1912 offered voters a variety of progressive choices. Roosevelt spoke out for women's suffrage, pensions for retirees, workers' compensation, an 8-hour workday, banning child labor, and a federal trade commission to regulate business. Wilson characterized all business monopolies as evil and championed small business and free market competition. Eugene Debs also ran as a socialist, while Taft campaigned on a more conservative platform. Wilson captured 42% of the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote in overwhelming fashion, along with a Democrat majority in Congress. Wilson finished with 435 electoral votes to Roosevelt's 88. Taft finished with 8 electoral votes, winning only the states of Utah and Vermont. In all, 75% of the votes went to reform candidates, allowing Wilson to declare that he had a mandate from the public to break up trust and expand the role of the federal government in social reform. As a child, Wilson had grown up in the South during the Civil War and Reconstruction. He had a very strict upbringing, as his father, grandfather, and uncle were all Presbyterian ministers. As a young adult, he worked as a lawyer, history professor, and later served as the president of Princeton University. He went on to serve as the governor of New Jersey from 1911 to 1913. As governor, he supported legislation to regulate railroads and public utilities, fought for workers' compensation, and supported public calls for direct primaries. That is, a primary in which members of a party nominate candidates by direct vote. As president, Wilson's platform, known as the New Freedom, called for stronger antitrust legislation, reduced tariffs, and extensive banking reform. With this approach, Wilson hoped to take on what he referred to as a triple wall of privilege: tariffs, trust, and high finance.
Okay, this map shows the election of 1912. Okay, so Woodrow Wilson is in the yellow. You can see how much he won. Okay, Theodore Roosevelt, he is the progressive candidate, and he didn't do too bad. And then you can see William Taft, our Republican, he got pretty stomped. Okay, so for a third party, for Roosevelt, this isn't really that bad. Okay. All right, let's see how Theodore Roosevelt joins the Bull Moose Party.
Roosevelt agonized over leaving the presidency. There was so much more he wanted to do. But true to his word to the American people, he did not run for re-election in 1908. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After much soul-searching, Theodore Roosevelt thought it better to keep his word with the American public than to run for office again in 1908. Instead, Roosevelt decided to handpick his successor, someone he could rely on to carry out his agenda. With William Howard Taft, Roosevelt thought he had the perfect candidate. In truth, the two men were opposites in almost every way. Roosevelt was famous for his athleticism, while Taft was often ridiculed because of his weight. Happy to have been Roosevelt's right-hand man, Taft never had any real desire to be president. Taft fretted over making decisions and often procrastinated. He believed the president's job was merely to uphold the Constitution. Groundbreaking policies set by the freewheeling Roosevelt were slowly starting to reverse under Taft.
And TR was like a pot boiling over, watching Taft dismantle a lot of the programs and agendas that he had set. And he wanted revenge on Taft, and he got it.
The former best friends battled each other for the Republican nomination in 1912. It became so ugly that at one point, Taft broke down in tears. In turn, it was devastating to Roosevelt when the Republicans chose Taft as their candidate because they preferred his conservative politics. Even more shocking was Roosevelt's reaction. He joined the progressive Bull Moose Party. The result was a division in the Republican vote, opening the path for a clear victory for the Democratic challenger, Woodrow Wilson. Taft came in a distant third behind Roosevelt.
Okay, make sure you are adding all of your information to your notes page. Okay. So anything that is on this side that's in the slide, you don't need to add, obviously. You can just add information here, okay, that is underlined. So I believe that is it for the election of 1912 and our progressive era presidents. Y'all have a good day.